Right.
He asked me yesterday, he goes wet or dry trim? And I was like, well, if you'd asked me that question 25 years ago, it was wet trim. You were locked in your house by yourself for 18 hours at a stand.
Yeah, kind of.
Whereas, like, nowadays, there's a ton more technology to kind of help us along.
That still reminds me of one of my favorite memes ever. So the guy's sitting in there at the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Do you have any history of mental illness in your family?" And he goes, "Well, I do have a cousin that still wet trims."
We're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed, teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, true OGs, masters of the growth, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the data's green, we set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5-8, and it's always available at jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop. That's right.
And everybody, just a quick reminder again, Black Friday sales going on right now at the shop. You know what the address is, jugdealers.shop. We do have 30% off. It's a true Black Friday deal. And on top of that, anybody that spends $50 or more will get an additional mystery prize for free in their order. Go over again. Black Friday deal is going on right now, jugdealers.shop. And that sale is going on from November 16th all the way to almost the end of the month, November 29th. So it's not just a Black Friday deal, 30% off site-wide. Come and get it, guys. Ain't gonna last forever.
We'll get that 30%.
Live.
Hello.
But we wanted to talk a little bit about something
listener.
Oh yeah, get your shout out. I forgot you had
I was
it.
gonna say you had one.
Well, sure. You know what? I did have one because we were talking about the Jug Club real quick, and we wanted to throw a specific shout out to our man Sticky Skunk. He did end up with the number one
he
membership
snuck in
number.
The door while it wasn't even open yet.
It wasn't even open.
Snuck
And
in.
the guy,
those damn weed grown hackers.
Yeah. Cheers to you, Sticky Skunk. Big shout out. But one of the things we wanted to talk about today specifically, and honestly, the big reason is because labor is such a huge part of the overall budget. I mean, reality is we always laugh because people want to attack nutrients, which should be only 1 to 2% of the overhead.
Yeah, people.
When 40% is labor.
It's so funny how
give me
people,
a break.
I need to save money on nutrients. And it's like, no, dude, you need to save money on labor because, again, that is your highest cost. The touch time that people spend with plants is real. And so we wanted to kind of break down today automation, and
why it's becoming not an option anymore.
Yeah, it's not a choice.
When unit prices are up here, automation is a choice. Automation is becoming obligatory.
Yeah, it's not an option.
It's not an option anymore. And I think that's our biggest thing. It's not an option. It truly is the future. And one of the things that you and I, really stuck with us when we went over to Holland last year was, you're in these huge facilities and you go, where is everybody?
Oh, yeah.
Because you're so used to people just running around in a cannabis facility, and half of them don't even know what's going on. They're running up, they're sweeping, they're doing this, they're doing that. There, it's like the only place you saw people was packaging up stuff, and hell, half the time it was even robots, which we'll get into.
Yeah, it's funny because as soon as you said, I was thinking about the harvest train.
Yeah, the harvest
train.
And
the funniest part is like,
tomato train, choo-choo.
Inadvertently, you'll be standing there in front of the train. And first off, the thing will stop. Then it'll wait for a couple of minutes. And then it'll kind of like,
hey, man.
It'll be like beep, 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 beep.
Yeah.
But it's really, really funny because, there's so, like you were saying, you see so few people considering, it's hard for people to really understand miles and miles and miles of glass. Yeah. Like you're driving down the road and it's just like, you're like, is this greenhouse ever going to end?
I got a great shot coming out because depending on where you take off out of Schiphol, right? Because I think a lot of people don't realize, the Netherlands is not very big. And then the state of Holland, it's basically a state, right, is not very big. And then it's only one little small region of Holland that is really where all the glass houses are. It's around the Osmer area and all that.
When you do the satellite zoom in, you're like,
where?
Oh, damn. Like that's just...
It's just right there.
That's literally like square miles.
So I took off on the right direction out of Schiphol this time. I was able to get a really good shot of just all the glass houses in that particular area. So again, automation was key. Where do we see automation? We saw automation in harvesting. We saw automation in planting. We saw automation in obviously environment, right?
Every segment, you know.
So let's talk about speaking of segments.
Here's what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about why, in the first place, automation, current automation, a lot of what we're using, what we're borrowing from some of the big ag, some of the practices that we've kind of seen kind of filter over, some of the challenges and limitations, you know, and then really what the future looks like. But that's what we're going to cover today. Really talking about this again, it's really intriguing and a lot, you know, I think when this show drops, we're maybe 2 weeks from BizCon, something like that, a week from BizCon.
Sounds about right.
So, you know, and that's really where you're going to start to see a lot of these advancements. That's the nice thing about BizCon. That's the nice thing about going to Berlin.
Yeah.
You know, that's really where you start to see these things. So, I mean, first off.
Well, even when I went to that show in Dusseldorf, which is really more of a horticulture show. And like, you know, seeing these robots plant these tiny little explants to the point where it's scanning them all and only picking the ones that's 3 millimeters or more or whatever. I mean, it's just like, you look at it and you go, holy crap, that really is, you're staring the future directly in its robot eye. You know, for whatever that means.
Well, to kick it off, let's talk about why automation. Because exactly like you just said, staring the robot right in the robot eye. You know, cannabis, first off, is a
very labor-intensive crop.
Compared to lettuce, compared to tomatoes. There's a lot of, as I like to say, there's a lot of touch time. There's a lot of touch time. And
it's
again,
well put, a lot of touch time.
And you know, it's... You know, when I go back to my years of laying brick and stuff, if you lay 60 or, 120 brick in an hour, you're touching a brick for 30 seconds. You know, and reality is whatever you're doing in a building, you need to be able to equate those things to where, hey, this plant's going to take me 2 minutes to deal with.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which means...
And then extrapolate it across the room, extrapolate across the facility.
Ultimately, you're only touching 30 plants an hour. You know what I mean? And so in that respect, you know, one of the things that you know, I've been pretty keen to point out to people right off the rip is like, guys are only in their 8-hour shift, 10-hour shift, and then guys are only in there when the lights are on.
Right.
You know, so reality is just thinking on that kind of holistically. There's a lot of time where work could be getting done that it's not getting done because, again.
Well, then but also, you know, whether it's processes within a facility, right? Because even, I mean, looking back, for example, at workflow in some of these legacy facilities and just how bad it was, right? And how all of a sudden facility design alone and workflow from room to room and how just those littlest things.
Oh, yeah.
5 seconds here, 5 seconds there, not going all the way to the end of the hallway, not having to pass that many people, like you say, these touch points, or what we look at in a grow room as failure points even, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and on top of that, if you look at GMP certification and things like that, so now you got compliance rules, right? So all of a sudden, more and more rules keep coming in, right? And you already have something that's so labor intensive that if you're doing it good, it's 40% of your overhead.
Yep.
If you're doing it bad,
it's 50, 60.
50, 60.
You know,
like,
so that's,
how do you even operate a business like that?
You know, and people don't take into account the fact that, like, you know, if you got a guy that's $25 an hour, that guy probably costs you 30. Because the reality is, you got to pay that guy's health insurance. You got to pay his 401k. There's all these other things, you know, workman's comp, unemployment. So, like, there's all these other things. Whereas these machines, you buy them, you use them until they don't work anymore. And the reality is, you have one guy that you're paying more money to maintain the machines,
right?
But and again, that's, you know, I hate to say it, but, you know, there's a lot of these positions where you're going to get, you know, a robot's not going to call in sick.
Right.
It's not going to call in because...
Doesn't even need the lights on. Doesn't care about the environment.
Yeah, it doesn't, you know, if
CO2, who gives a shit?
If it had a family member that passed away, any of these things.
Nothing.
And I'm not trying to be unsympathetic to those things, but, you know, the story I always tell people is like, my dad passed away and I was at work an hour later. Why? Because the plants don't care. Well, the reality is if you have employees that are just programmed to only care 24 hours a day, it changes you can rely on them just as long as somebody plugs them in at night.
Right. Well, and here's the thing: when you have these other sectors that, Well, they've either relied on automation or migrant labor. One of the either with both of them means less expensive, right? And unfortunately,
they just got raided out in California.
Yeah. Well,
and
that's kind of why I was thinking that, though. That's kind of why I was thinking that, because it's all part of the deal, right? You know what I mean? So now you have more need for automation, which is like obviously costs money, but also the automation aspect. What was it when we were at the tomato place? I believe they were operating at a profit at 3 cents profit a kilo, I believe.
Was it 3 or 10?
No, it was 3.
3 cents per kilo.
So again, you have to embrace some of these things. Automation was absolutely embraced, specifically in, again, there's that difference between, horticulture and agronomy, and it's a bit of a fine line. And then even some things can be both, right? You got field corn, which is an agronomic crop, and you got sweet corn, which is a horticultural crop. Basically, a horticultural crop has more inputs, has more human touch, more inputs, more nutrients, things like that, right? So clearly we deal with the horticultural crop.
I think something that people, it's a tool, and the reality is as well, they have that new technology where it can like laser the weeds.
Yeah.
But it's like, they have these cameras that can see and observe like all these different things that like just the human eye just doesn't have the bandwidth to do.
Absolutely.
And so
it gets tired again, just like you say, and the human eye gets tired and everything else. And I mean, you figure like if they're dealing with infrared cameras, they can be working at night. They don't even have to. If you were doing de-leafing or some shit. Now, granted, some of these, and the reason I also mentioned horticulture versus agronomy, agronomic crops, because there's less, hand input, less human touch. It's much more lent to automation. That, some of these things like a de-leafing process on a 3D plant. Like, don't get me wrong, everything will be possible eventually.
You talk to Jesse, man. Those robots are like $30,000. They're not that far away.
Well, like I said, but also I think we can also agree with one of the reasons that it's lagged on cannabis specifically, and we saw this when hemp was big for that 1 year.
Yeah.
But
you remember all the machines you saw with like transplanting and harvesting? People were using fucking combines.
But that's my whole point. But also then all those combines were getting totally gummed up, and they just wasn't like, it wasn't like they were having to just make it work.
They didn't think that one through.
No, they didn't think that one through. But obviously when you have prohibition and everything else too, that's clearly going to lag the technology. Why? Because also the unit price is going to be kept up. So you got a high level of prohibition means you have a high unit price, which means you can afford that high labor price. It doesn't matter. I mean, those were the days where you coming over and you were going over the homies and it was like $20 an hour and all the weed you can smoke.
Yep.
Here's a pair of scissors.
Yep.
Better money than I can make anywhere.
Maybe a pizza.
No,
you
always.
Gotta feed the mother.
You gotta feed.
Beers. Yeah, you gotta feed the herd.
My rate was 25 and lunch. So I would get a bomb ass lunch.
I mean, I remember walking in and it might be a friend of mine. He's actually listening to the show. In fact, he called me one time. It was just one of those deals, and this is when I felt like we were finally making it, GRAMBO. Right? He's driving down, and it just YouTube jumped from one show to the next show, and we popped up, and it was my voice, and he's like, "What?" Like it was what the hell?
I've had a couple homies like that.
And so, and he was where I got my very first clones. I think I told the story. I'm not naming names right and whatever else, but when I walked in that first time, and it's just weed everywhere, and I'm just like, it's like here's a pair of scissors, here's a piece of pizza,
I need your help,
here's a joint, you know what I mean? So life was good.
It's funny because talking about any of this, we're guys who are coming from the place. It's funny because on Ben's show,
right,
he asked me yesterday, he goes wet or dry trim, and I was like, well, if you'd asked me that question 25 years ago, it was wet trim purely because you were locked in your house by yourself for 18 hours at a stand.
Yeah, kind of.
Whereas like nowadays, there's a ton more technology to kind of help us along. And so, nowadays I'm like, strip it as much as you can, but like dry trim it. And even like I said to him, like even with the bin,
hot button item,
dude. Even with the bin technology we have nowadays, when you bin up buds that are on the stem and stuff like that, like you can keep that so much better than like if you had told me to do that in like the early 2000s or the late 90s, I would have told you were out of your fucking mind.
I will say that still reminds me of one of my favorite memes ever. So the guy's sitting in there at the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Do you have any history of mental illness in your family?" And he goes, "Well, I do have a cousin cousin that still wet trims.
But that's the whole
wet
thing.
trim, by the way.
That
was a coma meme.
They have that machine that's like a fan.
Right.
And like you just and like, I mean, dude.
Yeah. And again, anything takes a little bit of art, but that's kind of your point too, right? It's not about eliminating people. It's about reducing.
It's just about being efficient,
and saying, instead of, good, bad, or indifferent. And by the way, guys, this is going to happen whether it's AI or anything else, right?
Hey guys, today's show is brought to you by JugDealers.shop. You want to grow the best cannabis possible? Head over to JugDealers.shop and get something like our Ruby Fulvic. It's going to give you more efficient uptake on your NPK. You could also try our Winter Frost to increase secondary metabolite uptake and improve your cultivar's flavor and phenotypic expression. Or finally, grab some Cocoa Blocks to save time and money. This is how you can support the show, and it keeps us going. We're never sponsored. We're 100% funded by you taking your garden to the next level. Head over to jugdealers.shop and get something to help your cultivation thrive. Now, back to the show. As we step into the next segment, it's there's a lot of current automation in Canada. I think when people think automation, they're thinking like robots and stuff like. Whereas like the Mobius and all these the Trim Brothers and like all.
Or let me even take it another step. What about just cleaning? Right?
Oh, yeah.
What about a 24? Yeah. What about just a Roomba?
You know what I mean? I've discussed a wet-dry Roomba.
Hold on now. I got something here. Shit. Don't put this out yet, GRAMBO.
Hey, this episode, not for sale.
Not for sale.
The wet trimmer. Buy Roomba.
But all those things, I mean, there's so many. I remember a couple years ago in Vegas seeing the pot filling machine.
Right.
And it's funny because even when you discuss, let's say, blocks.
Right.
That may be not automation on our end, but
sure.
There's a certain amount of automation that goes on the front end to create those blocks.
Automation is still automation. Good point.
Really the point behind automation is saving time.
Well,
that's the whole thing. So even if it goes to a point where, hey, because again, I used to have it to where I could tell you how many transplants you could get in an hour because it's how many pots you can fill, blah, 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 blah.
Sure. But
you write up a process with the blocks. How much time does that save?
Well, they save a lot of times, but also why are we having to do this? And it's related to margins and scale, most specifically, right? Lower margins, larger scale, right? So in that scenario, automation is absolutely inevitable. And then, of course, just the ability to shut off the lights and just even for cleaning. Even for cleaning. Shut the lights off and go, this is going to be clean for the next 12 hours with the dark off. I don't have to spend money on somebody having to sweep it up or spray this down or whatever the heck it happens to be. And I do like the point that you make that, automation comes in many different forms.
Yeah, I think that's where people get it confused is that it's not, there's a lot of different processes where it's like, dude, it's funny spending time in Michigan lately because it's like, that was the birthplace of the assembly line, but ultimately, all these other towns around in Michigan, they all built the parts. Right. And they all went to Detroit and all got assembled.
Or were the delivery service to bring the parts, or were the shop that did maintenance on the trucks that did the delivery, you know what I mean, or whatever. Everything were all these ancillary businesses. But let's talk specifically.
Let's break it down room by room.
So let's even look at as far as like what are we seeing in very specific areas. Propagation is kind of the natural place to start, right?
And we're seeing automated seedling trays. We're seeing tissue culture robots. We talk about our friend Jesse, and Jesse's literally. He's discussing the subscription where you just it just comes fogging chambers, some of the boom sprayers. Yeah. And it's funny because some of the facilities that you and I have toured that are kind of these used to have another purpose.
Right.
It's great. It's really cool when you go in and you see and like, dude. And Matt,
well, remember the one that was the 6 layers? It was an old lettuce grow. By the way, that just finally got shut down. A little bit of a tear, although it was. The most ridiculous.
And it's craziness because again, we talk about that. We have our segment about what we're borrowing from Big Ag, but truth of the matter is that is some of the stuff we're like. And for any of you who've been in there, and I know we have a lot of listeners who are in the cultivation and some of these big grows. How much time do you spend spraying? Like, how much time do you spend with a dram or a Sebring sprayer, like walking around?
But again,
so having the boom sprayers.
And again, but same thing like the blocks instead of transplanting. Like that's another great, or and now we're having a cheap bag instead of a pot that has to be washed, you know what I mean? So to me, even at home, I realized, well, what if I could only transplant once? So that led me to not doing blocks, going and cloning directly into a solo cup, taking that solo cup into a 2-gallon. I transplant it one time. For me, oh man, at home, efficiency,
dude,
way up.
I always used to comment how the guy who washes pots is it's like the best job in the grow, because that guy's got job security. There's something always needs.
Always gonna be a pot needs to be washed.
I went into a grow earlier this year, and they had these industrial dishwashers that a human person could walk into. It's just it all comes down to how much money you feel like spending. But ultimately,
I'll have to pull out that that video of that planting robot that I saw in Germany, GRAMBO, and you can pull that up. We'll have to have a little B-roll on that.
Dude, plant handling, and what this is, one of the cooler things I've seen. And again, automation comes in different shapes and sizes, but they're the same facility in Maryland. These guys have it where they have a clone room. There's benches outside the clone room that they transplant to the bench.
Yeah.
And then the bench works its way through the building.
Well, like the Orchid Warehouse.
Like the Orchid Warehouse.
Where did they get that?
Exactly.
Huh.
Hey, big egg. But and then it actually pulls right up to the harvest area. And they have
workflow we were talking about too.
So instead of you going to room 14 to harvest, or room top 5 or whatever,
room 14 comes to you.
Yeah, literally the benches just come to you. They actually had a dipping station where they could dip entire benches. At one point they had aphid pressure, so they were using Beauveria bassiana.
So literally, they
submerged the whole.
Geez.
If I'll send it to you, GRAMBO, and you can post it, but it's got a picture of Eugene.
Well, and then I've seen
Eugene and Redman.
Right.
When we were checking out that facility.
Gotcha.
But.
Well, and I've even seen and this is a little bit more nursery, but like taking them from in the greenhouse out to, outside for the season or whatever. And it lines it up like it's fucking Arlington National Cemetery.
Yep.
Bro, you get it on these fucking angles and it's like.
And I mean, a lot of
it's insane.
It's crazy because, usually the places you see this is these 200,000 square foot facilities in which, bro, we're talking 60, 80, $100 million in infrastructure.
Well, and again, that's where
the limitations.
That's part of the limitations,
because it's like, look, you're going to spend the money up front, you're going to spend the money on the backside, but the reality is you're going to spend the money.
You're going to spend. Well, we've said it. Pay me now or pay me later.
Pay me now. Yeah,
and I mean a dick. Pay me now or pay me later.
If it's cheap, it's not good. If it's good, it's not cheap.
Now, but dare I say, one of the other limitations is that it's cannabis. Going back to like what we said before. So there's been, a prohibition means there's been a lack of R&D and study and even mechanization.
No one wants to spend.
If you go out to Tulare Farm Show and you go out there, I got cherries. How do I do that? This machine.
Well,
I do this. How do I do it? There's no this machine for cannabis still, right? It's kind of crazy.
And with RICO statute, no one wanted to produce something that was exclusively for. Do you remember that guy?
Ask Tommy Chong, man.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
You remember that guy that had the dry cleaning setup for growing for harvesting? Like it was like the dry cleaning racks.
Oh, nice. Okay,
I don't know, but it's just funny because. Yeah, nobody wants to be involved, so it's like you got to have.
But again, now you can. Now that you see Priva, now you see Argus, now you see Rhythm, now you see these different major companies coming here that weren't available for one because of scale too. It's like, yeah.
I think we have side discussions about it, but even though cannabis thinks it's big shit and we buy a lot of nutrients. When it comes to there's a reason Hawthorne's not playing in the game anymore, and that's because we are such a small part of the world.
It's a small specific sandbox. You know what I mean? And we're trying to make it bigger. We're making it bigger. But moving on, right? Another, I think, really one of the very obvious places for automation and where people's heads go is, of course, fertigation, irrigation, HVAC, all sensors,
environmental control, all the big time.
But then even really get into the AI base, which you've always been able to set, or maybe not always, but obviously in modern irrigation, you're able to set parameters for maximums and minimums and things like that. Yeah. But to really have a true system that can learn the plant and you want like really like take on that data from grow to grow. I mean, this, you know, you want to talk about again, efficiencies and maximizing output and genetic potential and things like that. I mean,
here's a big one here's a big one I think people kind of miss and they don't think about as far as automation. Dosing on the feeds, bro. Because that, I'm going to tell you right now, when I started in 2010, we were rocking hoses. And,
sure.
And even if we went and we made batch tanks and did the thing, we didn't have the type of not only automation but monitoring, where we're monitoring in live time PHEC moisture values and really starting to tailor our feeds. Not only based on moisture in the plant, but also based on environmental parameters, like we were talking about with Shane Hudo, you know, with a lot of that driving. And so that's one of the things that, you know, in the last couple of years, the advancements are great and they really make it, you know, look, I don't believe anybody when they tell me they get 5 pounds of light. I don't care who you are. I don't care what show you went on. You're full of it. But the reality is, somewhere in the 3 to 4 numbers, I can believe that. And a lot of those numbers come from pulse feeding, from all these different things that, like, quite frankly, we weren't doing even 5, 6 years ago.
I think your point as well, if I might play off of that a little bit, is not just they were able to take down the numbers and take the data, but then we're able to do something with it.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, none of that came from, I can tell you right now, like at Grassroots, grams per square foot, grams per watt, grams, you know, like there were so many different parameters. And yes, you're right. It's taken years
that information
of taking
now,
that information
what do we do with it?
And being like, oh, well, maybe if I did 8 feeds a day at 900 millimeters.
Well, but also understanding,
you know what I mean?
Understanding at least from a base concept, things like VPD and also understanding physiology of a substrate.
Did you just say VPD?
I said concept.
I love
you. Or, you know, even just morphology of the substrate,
yeah,
right?
understanding
where does the plant even
understanding
take
how all
stuff
those things tie together in the
bigger scheme of things. And again, it's a system. It's systems based, right? Really agriculture and I think more specifically when you talk about horticulture, because so much of it is, you know, artificial, it's system based, right?
Yep.
And again, that goes back to the law of the minimums and all these kind of things. You're only going to perform to your minimum.
What about like trimming and harvest? We've seen a lot of different changes there. We have those automatic buckers, like we were saying. You get the Mobius, you got all different.
And
types
some of it's
very,
very rudimentary but effective.
Yeah,
like even just a strip bucker, for example. And you know, again, that's an obvious one. You know, that's an obvious space to find it. Now, do I look at things like, you know, I mean, maybe it's best at a certain point to just go hedge everything off at just one straight. You know what I mean? I still think that there's some things that have to do. And when you're talking about, you know, 3D plant and structure and actually being able to trim at this point on the petiole where you want to. I haven't seen anything, but it's coming somewhere.
You know,
just start zapping leaves off.
I can tell you from experience, the trim department. Shout out to all you guys, man. Because it is the heartbeat. It is the hardest department. It really, really is. And so I think the day when we actually see robot trimmers, I think that's really and be clear. Someone is working on
it. And no, for sure. And I also
that.
think just a lot like we talk about Synganics, right? And the marrying of the minds.
Yeah.
I look at both. I look at a certain amount of automation and a certain amount of hand touch.
I hate the machines, man. I'm not going to lie. I hate the machines.
But again, I think if you can do a certain amount of it, right, Gabe, and then cut down a lot of that labor cost, but do a certain amount and then do the most important stuff by hand, by person.
Amazing fact. You know, last thing is packaging and distribution.
Well, that one's just
stuff like that. And I will tell you,
pre-rolls, packaging.
When I worked at Grassroots, we did the math. You know, because they got the penny pinchers kind of going over everything, and we estimated that we gave away $400,000 a year in overages. Now, again, I get it. Everybody's like, oh, that's being a good. I get it. But the reality is those numbers add up. That's people's salaries. That's a lot of stuff. For us to get the machines to fully automate it, to take out an entire packaging room and put in, you know, basically 3 people, 2 weighing up top and 1 putting it in the bags and sealing, that machine was, I think, $300,000. So in 1 year, that machine pays for itself. And it's like, unfortunately, when you're running a company, it's funny because, like, I remember when I first met Shed, and Shed was like, hey, man, like, do you replace your bulbs? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, they're 2 years old. They probably lost 10%. And I'm like, yeah, 10% is no big deal. And he's like, it's only a big deal. Like, he's like, look at it as like you're losing 10% of your harvest. And you harvest 100 pounds a year, and then all of a sudden you harvest 10 pounds less a year, in which pounds at the time were like $4,000.
Meant something.
So all of a sudden you're like, man, you're losing $40,000 per harvest, in which
now that means something.
Like for a quarter of that money, you could replace all the bulbs in that room. And so that's one of those
There's your
things
ROI
where
calculation.
Where like for you and me at home on the 4-lighter, guess what? Really not that big a deal. It's negligible. It's kind of like, oh, I'm still doing a good job.
But with scale.
But with scale, man, like all these things add up. And that's really that's the point of all this, is that, like, man.
Hey, everybody. I did not want to interrupt the show. However, we need you to help us by taking your grow to the next level. Go right on over to jugdealers.shop and pick up some Slicium. Don't let bugs or a failed AC or a broken pump take your grow down. Get Slicium at jugdealers.shop. It is readily water soluble and uptaken immediately to thicken cell walls and reduce any and all abiotic and biotic stresses. Keep in mind, this is how we support the show. We are never sponsored. We are funded by you taking your grow to the next level. So to support us and your grow, head on over to jugdealers.shop and get yourself something real nice. Now back to the show.
All this stuff adds up, and efficiencies, really figuring out the way to kind of streamline things, and not only streamline things, but this gives an opportunity where the people that I have in there are more meaningful, and I can pay them better.
See, okay, I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because I think some of this, I don't want this to be looked at something like kick everybody out of the grow.
No, I don't want to get rid of. I love people.
No. But I think there's something about being said about keeping a tighter team with a better vibe. You know what I mean? And putting people in positions that they can be happy. I can't imagine, and I've been in the trim room. Like, I've done it. I can't imagine doing that forever.
No.
It's the same way I can't imagine working nights forever. I can do it for a while, right? I can't imagine packaging 1/8 bags all day. And again, God bless all you people out there that are making, because that's the heartbeat of these operations.
It really is, and it's hard.
But it's hard jobs, and I'd rather not have to have people, just like you said. And yes, it does mean less total people, but that are paid better, that are happier, that are treated better. To me, I think that ends up being a better operation, and it becomes an operation that's still around. Because an operation that's going to be overstaffed, well, sure, they're holding a lot of people until it's gone, and then they're holding nobody.
Oh yeah.
So there's you can look at that a lot of different ways. But let's look at specifically, as we move into the next segment, just some of the things that we are borrowing from Big Ag.
Big time.
And I always look back at some of the things, with Jair when he came, and it's like we were big hoods then, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying little hood, and everybody's saying
little hood.
What the hell are you talking about?
Not just little hood, not ducted
little bulb.
with no lens. You're like, you want me to hand a goddamn space heater?
You're like,
from the
dude,
ceiling?
you're like, get out of here, bro. You are a psycho. Well, here we are, right?
Well,
we are.
Yeah, some of the big stuff that you see us obviously using is the racking systems,
trellising,
stuff like that. Some of the closed loop nutrient monitoring, all those types of things. Argus. Well, Anderson fertigators.
Right. Well,
I'll never forget when I first started working with Anderson. We were talking 2017, 2018.
Right.
And I'm using the full New Millennium line, and he's like, "How many pumps do you want?" And I'm like, "I would like 19." And he's like,
nobody's ever asked for that before.
What do you want 19? Like, most people ask for like 4.
Yeah.
They ask for like a base.
You know what? Make
a
it 20.
B part.
Cool,
a pH up, and and maybe an acid, and that's it. You know what I mean? And
not here.
And I'm like, no. I got all these parts. There's all these things. And so it's definitely, we've been taking a lot of different things. Honestly, one thing that people don't think about that we've adopted from Big Ag, the RFID tracking. As much as we hate it, you know, a lot of things
Disney.
and it's like, look, I you know, go to Vermont. Vermont doesn't have a lot of that tracking. I mean, that's
hey,
that's
look,
cool
Vermont
market.
still allows the micros.
But,
I love what Vermont's doing up there. But, you know, the other thing, Gabe, remember it was like when we saw, it felt like when we were in a Dutch greenhouse, there was nothing that did one thing.
Yeah.
Everything did multiple things.
Yeah.
So you had the wire trellising that was all 1 by 1, or, you know, whatever, maybe 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters or whatever, right, for the chrysanthemums. One chrysanthemum between every single one of them. The planter rolled down the pipes, which was the irrigation, which was the side of the trellising, which went up and down.
That
like,
was a great,
get out of here.
It was funny when we caught that, too, because we're like, dude, it's got like 3 uses now. That's totally cool. You know?
But you say that to them, and they're kind of like, well, why wouldn't it? It's like,
exactly.
oh, yeah, sorry.
And I think, you know, I'll never forget, you know, I used to, again, simple automation. Doesn't just because automation is really something that makes things easier. So, you know, when I first started putting out the trellis nets on like these 40-foot tables, you know, we would take a broom and we would mount all this shit and we'd have it and we'd roll the thing out, you know, and we figured out like a meg shift. Well, somebody in the last 5 years has built a rack that is just for, I can't remember the name. Shout out to you guys. I don't know the
whoever
name
it is. Thank
whoever the hell
you.
you guys are. Thank God. You know, but the reality is they've made it so that, and I used to pride myself on being like, look, this is a one-man job. And I would do it, but like it was the type of thing where like not everybody could like if you weren't inclined, you would be like, oh, I hate this. I'll kill you. You know, whereas these guys make it. And so again, automation is not, you know, we don't need to make it like it's this big crazy thing. It's really just anything that makes tasks simpler and take less time.
Well, and again, you know, eventually we're just trying to be the puppeteer, right, with these rooms, right?
Plant janitors.
Yeah, plant janitors, man. I mean, you know, shout out. We need more of them out there.
Take a dab for plant janitors. Not for nothing. Now you're taking 2 dabs.
2 dabs.
Because you got a not for nothing dab and a plant janitor's
But,
dab.
you know, something else, you know, within the fertigration is this idea of crop steering, which unfortunately, and actually Mex did a really good write-up on it. And not talking shit about it, but talking about how crop steering is really more of an idea and a very all-encompassing thing. I mean, is picking up your pot and deciding whether to water it or not crop steering on some level? If you're a person that goes, I want it to dry out more because that's I think to do it.
Gallon of water is 8 pounds.
8
You know
pounds.
how much
But you see what I'm saying? So that's crop steering at its simplest form, to where we're going all the way up to, like you're saying, not only we have this data collection, but now we can take that data and put it to actual use, right? And then be able to see the outcome of it, right? And that's only been, within the last
I mean, dude,
really few years.
I will definitely give the Jungle Boys and guys like that some credit, because they were the ones that were really kind of pushing that whole.
Well, and I only make the point that crop steering isn't an alley; it's a whole village, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's not anything.
100%.
And I think so many people think it's like super specific.
Well, people for the longest time, again, people thought, hey, if I'm going to grow a big plant, it's got to be in a 5-gallon or a 3-gallon. You know what I mean? And
we
it's
now
like,
know
no,
that's
you just need to keep that motherfucker alive.
Well,
but the reality is, the biggest plant we can get out of the smallest pot you can live with. Now, again, like I've said, please don't hate on me for this, but this pot size is a function of how often you can get to water it.
Well, and more, even more specifically, you know, I came to the conclusion a while ago that really your plant size, which I used to always think was tied to pot size, is actually more tied to irrigation strategy than it is to pot size.
Yeah.
So anyway, can you
slide
move
that up a little bit, Graham Beezinator?
So let's, we're going to kind of coming towards the back end of this, but let's talk about a little bit about the challenges and limitations, and then we'll, make a slight nod to the future, although it is going so fast. I think it's almost impossible to talk about what the future is, because it could truly be anything. But, we know that cannabis isn't lettuce. This is one of the things that we've been kind of alluding
lettuce,
to.
not tomatoes, not strawberries,
not corn, right? Right. And so it's something, it has a different morphology. It has something different that we're farming. Is there really anything else besides maybe some of these,
fruit.
maybe some of these things like, I don't know, lavender extracts or certain extracts that might be sticky. It's nothing that's sticky like this that I can think of, besides like honey or some shit, which obviously isn't a botanical extract, right? But morphology, stickiness, the legal landscape, go figure.
The legal landscape,
you know what I mean?
Sure.
All of these things obviously are challenges and limitations.
Robots don't care about buds they drop on the floor, and all that needs to be accounted for.
I mean, and again, even this, and I was talking about this even with the combines, just completely gumming up systems, right? Yeah. Gumming up trimming systems. Not, trying to take and adapt things that are in the horticultural world, it's not always a direct translation. There's got to be some adaptation.
I always used to complain about, every 6 months we would have to bust out the alcohol and go to town on the floors in the building.
Right.
And then someone came up. I was at Peninsula Gardens, and these guys have these big rolls of a sticky on one side film.
Right.
It's 4 foot wide rolls, and they just roll these suckers out on the floor. They harvest, and when they're done harvest, they peel up the plastic, and there's no more of this nonsense where you're scrubbing the floor with alcohol every 6 months. And so again. It's not, when we talk about automation, it is not just us talking about, it's all these things that make it so that.
But now here's one of the things I want to talk about as a real limitation too, though, right? We talk about morphology, and we always talk about every discussion / argument, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes they get, more spirited than others. We're excitable. One of the real true limitations is that something like a robot really thrives on uniformity. So 3.5 grams in this bag over and over again and over and over again. That's a great robot task.
That's a robot task.
It's great. Going in and dealing with 10 different strains on a day and trying to de-leaf them properly to a variable level.
We'll see.
I know, but you see, I'm just looking at it as a current limitation.
If a robot can work 24 hours a day, I don't care how fast it does it, because it's just added 16 hours of
work
time.
What if it totally butchers it, right? Because again,
you just add some programming.
Well,
it's got to, like, you don't want it to come in and learn on your 200 light room.
No,
you're gonna get, and at some point it's all gonna be about the training. And
here's the thing:
what they download.
Right.
There'll be a download. There'll be a refresh.
There'll be a refresh. Reality is, though,
get the nerds downtown to handle that.
Yeah. Either way, there's gonna be an upgrade.
The autistic dude downstairs to deal with it.
Hey,
Jerin gets it.
But again, I do think that from at least my current knowledge with it, that's, again, robots do thrive on uniformity. I think that's a real limitation in that lack of, or that variability that we do currently see in cannabis. But do I think somebody's going to figure it out?
Anything that gets over it's just going to be.
Hey, look, I'll just, a la Kevin Garnett, anything is possible. So, and then, all this, not to mention high upfront costs, although those seem to be coming down every day. You even mentioned on a very expensive machine what that costs in a relatively short amount of time.
It's going to get more specialized.
Right.
Like I said, Jesse said you can get a good robot for like 30 grand right now. So I'm just saying. So reality is, all this ties together. What does the future of cannabis automation really look like?
Cannabis?
Cannabis.
Meow. We're trying to
meow. So, in the short term, we're just going to have smarter fertigation systems with some of this AI optimization.
I agree with that.
It's really going to be able to dial things in. We're going to be able to use, we're going to be able to go back and forth. Now, it's going to be learning, so that's going to be interesting. We're going to have improved trimming and packaging, robotics, and facilities from day one with automation. That's something that I'm really pushing.
Real workflow and proper.
That's something I'm pushing in the buildings
huge,
that I'm kind of working with, is like, hey, man, how are we going to plan for automation? Because reality is, it's coming.
Yeah.
So after that, let's say in the next 3 to 7 years, you're going to actually have vision-guided robots for pruning, for scouting, and for disease.
Which we're already seeing certain things like that, but not for this type of stuff.
I think you're going to start seeing it really driven towards our labs. You're going to see tissue culture labs with robotic propagation. So again, guy costs you 50, 60 grand a year or you have a couple guys that cost you that in a clone propagation room. You're going to have one person overseeing that. You're going to have fully integrated ERP systems with sensors, robots, compliance. This is, not for nothing, this is something, dab time. This is something that we have talked to Jesse about. Jesse comes from big bio, tech and stuff like that. Whereas, I've discussed it with people as far as building out labs. I always quote people at like $450, $500 a square foot. Those people are used to spending like $1,200 a square foot. So they, it is coming. It's just a question of the money being there for people to spend as we see Schedule 3 come out. That's really where people are finally going to be like, okay, I'll spend, you think 60 million's a bunch on a facility?
That's where big pharma can come in. Yeah, that's where
200 million.
That's where the scale can get totally thrown off.
Reality is, in the long run, we're going to see, drone pollinators, drone, fertigators or fumigators and stuff like that, where they're spraying these buildings. Really, it's someone just controlling the robots. It's going to be very little touch time from humans. Again, the way I see it going is we are going to be monitoring the machines, and the machines are going to be monitoring
and even
we're
I think you could probably set like a goal for less than 25%, labor input. And reality is, I think in some of those facilities we probably saw 5 or 10.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Should we get some robot janitor shirts? Because it seems like that's where this is all going.
Then you need someone just working on the robot janitor.
Well, and again, to wrap all this up, I think we've really hammered this point, but the fact that labor has always been the highest cost, in cannabis, and really it's a very high cost in horticulture in general. We know as technology, as it catches up, the real winners will be those who are designing the facilities, will be those who are able to manage these robot systems and all of the maintenance that comes with it. And I think that's where it kind of gets interesting, but also the people who understand workflow, the people also retain genetics properly. I think the worth is going to be in different things. You know what I mean? And I think you're already seeing that a lot more. 100%. In that the worth isn't even in the flower, it's in the genetic. And maybe it's not even the genetic as for something to grow in and of itself, but maybe as a genetic platform or a genetic a piece of the puzzle. So over time, it's interesting how we have seen what is of value in the crop. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's not 100%. Even the end piece itself.
I mean, I think I quote The Simpsons when I say I welcome these robot overlords. And
I, for one, welcome our robot overlords.
But I mean, it's gonna be interesting. It really should.
Well, and I think
sets us up for something different.
Well, and I think this also sets us up for a little bit of an episode 2, even talking about just AI and using and how we use AI for that cannabis that data that we're gathering. Like we're talking about, how do we take that data and how do we actually apply it? And AI is definitely one of those tools that will continue to happen to help us with that.
It's evolving every single day, and not for nothing, it's learning a lot about growing cannabis.
Well, and again, I don't think that automation and or robots or anything are here to necessarily replace us, but it is going to shift the workflow and is going to shift what our responsibilities as as
plant janitors,
as our job as plant janitors.
They took our nugs. They took our nugs.
Anyway, thank you guys so much. Thank you to 5/8. Check everything out on jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop. If you guys like what you're seeing, go ahead and join the club. Check out all the behind
subscribe and share, dude. Like, subscribe,
all that.
And share.
We're really, really close. I think we're 7 off of 16,000 subscribers.
We crossed. Yeah, we crossed that a while ago.
Oh, never mind. This is wild. Okay, sorry. I never remember.
On the way to 20, dude. Like, subscribe, and share.
That's always been our silent goal is 20,000 subscribers. So go ahead and hit that. Big shout out. Dude. And then I know, Gabe, you got one as well.
I wanted to shout out Ben Owens too. He's always been a big supporter of NewMill and stuff like that. I was actually just on.
You were on his podcast, right?
I was on his podcast. Yeah. Ironically enough, this will still drop before his podcast.
That's a marijuana moment, Ben Owens.
No, I think it was the Home Grow.
Okay,
THG.
podcast.
Common name, another Ben Owens.
It is, there's a couple runners named Ben Owens, But I just wanted to shout him out. I appreciate him having me on. We had a good little chat about just a bunch of different things. Yep. Obviously, shouted out NewMill, shouted out some seed guys. I guess really fun.
Even speaking of that, if you guys do have any suggestions, you never know. We know a lot of different people. If you have any desires or people that you might want to see on the show at some point in time, we're always open to suggestions. So I know we always say, if you guys got topics you have ideas on, let us know. But hey, if there's somebody that you'd love to see on the show, a particular breeder, or somebody, like, you never know. We've got a lot of connections. Throw it out there. Light one up for all of us, guys. We'll see you next time here from the Jug Den. Peace out.
Peace.